What if there was an Overwatch League draft? Have you ever wondered how that could change the landscape of the league? I've thought about this a ton, and while it doesn't make a ton of sense given the logistics behind it, something like this could still be very fun to think about. Think about what it could mean for many of these teams who are trying to rebuild or add that final piece or two to push them into contender status. How about we see how much different the 2021 rosters would look like with a theoretical simulation of round 1 of an Overwatch League draft? I know that the 2021 season has passed already, but this feels like the best example of how it could work. Before diving into it, I think some ground rules definitely have to be put in place. And the first thing to note is that the draft order will go by where teams finished in the Season 3 overall standings. The next rule I'm putting in place is that we're assuming that free agency has already happened up until this point. We're running it kind of like how the NFL does it for all my football fans out there. Which means that veterans a team signed this year will most likely still be there with the exception of one person who we will talk about a bit later. I believe that doing this will prevent confusion. Plus, you gotta think about it. If we did free agency after the draft, it would be impossible to tell where anybody would go, nor what needs any of these teams actually had. This is a lot easier. Rule 3 in place for this is the assumption that teams will pick up players that make at least some logistical sense, which means that a fully Western, Korean, or Chinese team, for example, would likely not draft any players outside of their region. It's not something that happens IRL, so I'm assuming the same would apply to a draft. Rule number 4 now is that any players who have already played in the league who came back this year from contenders are ineligible for the draft. They'll instead go to the teams we saw them sign with during free agency since they technically are no longer rookies. Something else worth noting in this rule set is that we're going with what we knew during the preseason, so we have no idea about any potential blow-up stars that we weren't really expecting, or potential mid-season retirements, or acquisitions of any kind. So think about it like this. Somebody like Xe, he'll still technically be on Dallas, and at the time, they'll still have no idea that he's going to retire. And then you have to think about the top consensus players. None of that is going to change. Your Mags and your Pelicans of the world, those are still considered to be the top prospects no matter what. And the final rule in place for this is that there is no trading and or swapping picks. Every team will pick from their designated spot. If you want a version where logistics don't really play a role in this, then let me know in the comments. Maybe we can make it happen. Anyway, that'll do it for the rules, so let's begin. If we direct our attention to the 2020 standings, you'll quickly remember that the Boston Uprising finished in 20th place, so they're the ones who are up on the clock first. Boston, they desperately need a young star to get them back on the right track after a rough year. They need playmakers pretty much everywhere aside from flex support because Myungbong at this time is still holding down the fort. And luckily for them, there is a prospect that pretty much every team was drooling over since the start of the offseason. The pick is in. The NFL nerd in me is kind of just imagining John Spector walking up on some stage with a card in his hand to announce the pick, like you'd see in real life with Roger Goodell and everything. Anyway, with the first pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Boston Uprising select Mag, Main Tank, Runaway. Given that they already have Stand 1 infusions, this may seem a little confusing. But if you ask me, this is a golden opportunity that cannot be wasted. Yeah, Mag might have to speak some English here and there, but it's a risk that is worth taking. He was the #1 rookie prospect in most people's eyes coming into this year, so who cares if you already have 2 main tanks? Either release fusions or make him a sponsored streamer or something. With Boston knowing they have the #1 pick at this time, surely they would make that happen. It'll be the first time since Gamsu where the Boston Uprising have a consistent playmaker at the main tank position. Boston also need DPS pretty badly, since technically they do not have Valentine, but it's a lot harder to come by a main tank than it is a strong DPS these days. Surely Coach Laurie would love to get his hands on such a solid prospect. I think that Mag and Punk, if they figure out the communication, could be a deadly front line, and I doubt that any Boston fan would be mad if they got this pick. And now this is where we see some immediate change. The #2 pick belongs to none other than the Washington Justice. With their support line, DPS, and off-tank roles already being filled out, Washington only have a glaring hole at main tank during this time, and with Mag already gone, they'll have to settle for the #2 option. With the #2 pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Washington Justice select Muse, main tank, 200 MS. The ceiling of Muse isn't quite as high as Mag's, but he still does possess immense potential. And I really do think that he could realize said potential even better in a fully Korean environment with a veteran like Fury playing next to him. He's obviously not the number one guy that Justice wanted, but that's a draft for you. You gotta have backup plans on hand, and I would say that Muse is a pretty good one. He's still a very talented rookie who fills out a big-time need, even if he might hinder the potential of this team slightly compared to Mag. And now at number 3, the Vancouver Titans are on the clock. The Titans are looking to sign any sort of playmaker who could boost their chances of winning some games at this point. They lack a true flex DPS, seeing as Linkser and Dalton are more known as hit scans, and luckily for them, they're in a position to get an upgrade compared to what they got in real life. With the 3rd pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Vancouver Titans select Pelican, Flex DPS, O2 Blast. Now this is the type of power move that the Titans need to head back in the right direction. This talented Flex DPS does not solve all of their problems, but it's a good start. His carry potential should be put on full display on a team that is way weaker than the one he actually played for. Even if it will usually come in a losing effort given the team he's on, I think that his high-level mechanics will really benefit Vancouver. He could basically become what Player was for the Mayhem back in 2018, and who knows, maybe after a year, the Titans could be in a better position to sign a stronger roster around Pelican, that way they can build around their future franchise cornerstone. If not, they could always trade him in the following offseason, as he'll surely have a lot of value. The 4th pick in the draft belongs to the Spitfire, who have the map differential tiebreaker over the Outlaws. If I wasn't using specific rules, they could literally pick so many amazing players who could make them even better than their current iteration. But London did make the choice to go fully Western, and I am honoring that decision. Given that they have veterans everywhere aside from Tank, getting one is in their best interest. With the 4th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the London Spitfire select Hottie, main tank, British Hurricane. Having that direct affiliation with their academy team makes this an easy choice. They love Hottie. They've seen him win time after time on the most successful European contenders team ever, basically. Why pick from anywhere else aside from the best? Now, of course, it might not be so easy to get his partner Mulf if there's multiple rounds of this draft, but I think that Hottie will be productive regardless if things do go the way of London. I mean, obviously we know they did it in real life, but this is just a theoretical. Given that a ton of EU talent likely won't be going in this draft anyway, there's a handful of options to choose from who could probably also be a good partner for Hottie. I think that Hottie is a safe pick who does give London what they theoretically needed. Now the Houston Outlaws are on the clock, and with no tanks currently on the team, this is going to be the position which requires the most attention. Main tank would be the ideal pick given the struggles last year with it, but the 2 best prospects are already off the boards, and their top off tank is still available. So, with the 5th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Houston Outlaws select Piggy, off tank, Talon Esports. The Outlaws' new management and coaching really took a liking for Piggy during the offseason. Him still being here is a blessing in their eyes. He might not be the common consensus best available to some people, but he's exactly the type of guy the Outlaws wanted. Not only does he give this team a needed boost at tank, but he gives them a playmaker outside of that DPS position, which is going to make Dante a very happy camper. The next team on the clock is the Toronto Defiant, and they signed quite a few veteran free agents during the offseason, so it really comes down to main support and flex DPS. It's a very interesting predicament to be in. It's a lot harder to come by a great main support these days, but the main support class, aside from a few, isn't extremely strong, and it's important to remember that a top flex DPS prospect is still on the board. With the 6th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Toronto Defiant select Valentine, flex DPS, WGS Phoenix. I would say he was the number 2 option aside from Pelican. Valentine showcased brilliant performances as a member of WGS. His echo and his great flexibility played a huge role in their success, and while Neist proved to be a great asset IRL, I would say that Valentine has the potential to bring about more production. Putting Valentine in the hands of Coach KDG could result in something special. We've seen him get the most out of tons of young players as of late, such as Hisu, Alarm, Neist, and Ansun J. This could be a match made in heaven if Toronto play their cards right. Falling just one spot later thanks to map differential is the Chengdu Hunters. The Hunters had a pretty inconsistent 2020, and they really need to dig deep and select the strongest prospect out of Chinese contenders if they intend to show improvement. And the cool thing about Chengdu is they're one of the only teams who is likely to pick out of the Chinese region, so the pick they make now might not have any sort of severe consequences later since they'll likely get even more people that they're looking to get. So, with the 7th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Chengdu Hunters select Gaga, main tank, Team CC. Forget about being a top-rated prospect from his region. Gaga was one of the highest-rated rookies in the entire class. He truly did dominate on a regular basis in his contenders days. He brings a strong wrecking ball, which of course Chengdu is going to love, but he also brings the versatility on other heroes that Among lacks. No offense to Among, we all love that guy, but Gaga is an all-around upgrade who gives the Hunters more options both hero pool and playmaking-wise. Gaga's chaotic yet stable playstyle is going to help the Hunters a ton. No matter how different the team looks without other potential rookies they got IRL, I think that Gaga by himself would definitely help this team out a ton. The number 8 spot in the draft belongs to the Dallas Fuel, and this is the first instance in this draft where a team already basically has a complete roster. But forget about how much they spent on said roster for a second. Let's just say that hypothetically they could afford to give out a rookie contract. Who would they get if given the chance to draft? Think about the layout of their team. They have 3 supports and 3 DPS since Xe technically was still on the team at the time of this draft. So with that in mind, I think that tank would make the most sense, but given who they're working with at those positions, it probably would not be wise to draft some sort of backup who would never play. So if you ask me, you can never go wrong with another DPS. That's the position that teams tend to stack up on the most, and I think a lot of teams around the league during this time did have 4 if I remember correctly, so basically we're just going to make the rich even richer here. So with the 8th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Dallas Fuel select Flora, DPS, Team Diamond. Coach Rush said that he had no interest in getting a Tracer specialist, but what if the player they got could be a whole lot more than just a Tracer player? That's where Flora comes in. We know him as a crazy Tracer these days, but pre-OWL he was known for hit scan and his Sombra. Supposedly, Flora was highly rated amongst coaches and scouts, so I think that Rush probably would not be able to resist here. He's a solid option who would likely seem like nothing more than a bench option at first. But once the news of Xe retiring drops, Dallas don't have to panic because they've got a viable replacement on standby, and because they have Flora, they could still play comps involving hitscan if they wanted to. Flora offers great flexibility mid-game. If you wanted a McCree or a sniper to counter something your opponent's doing, he can give you that. It's a nice alternative to that Sparkle and Doha duo that you can't ever switch from. He could be a great situational piece who could be of use in specific metas. So if you ask me, this is a big W if you support the Dallas Fuel. Flora is just going to make you even stronger. Anyway, though, next on the list is the Atlanta Reign, and they're in quite the predicament. Their middle-of-the-pack placing means that Pelican is way out of their reach, but that doesn't change the fact that they still need a flex DPS anyway. So, now we have to really think about what Atlanta could do from here. With the 9th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Atlanta Reign select Assassin, DPS, Runaway. While he's not the ultimate prize at this position, a lot of promise definitely does lie within him. With tons of first place finishes and clutch experience under high pressure environments under his belt, he could surely bring a winning way over to the Atlanta Reign. Flex DPS was a problem for this team last year. Projectile was a nightmare at times, but Assassin helps fix this problem immediately. He comes in with a fresh mindset, and surely he will complement Kai and Edison very nicely. His hero pool is vastly different from theirs, and he could definitely piggyback off them very well in certain scenarios, just like with Pelican. Getting us halfway through the draft is the Seoul Dynasty, and they quite honestly might be the most challenging team in this what if, because they've got a very balanced roster except for DPS, and that's why I would love to see them get another DPS player just for the sake of that balance, but I don't think they will just because during this time they really did love Prophet and Fitz that much. So in my opinion, this pick is kind of just not valuable to Seoul. However, they definitely still have to pick somebody given the rules. Considering that support is also a position with no backups, that's probably the only other place they could go. With the 10th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Seoul Dynasty select MCD, Flex Support, Element Mystic. Clearly, Seoul showed us they are totally invested in creative last year when they didn't sign anybody else at all during the real-life offseason, but creative isn't some untouchable god. I really do like the guy a lot and the potential is there, but Seoul could definitely make an upgrade. I recognize that now we kind of see MCD as not the greatest person given some of his actions that got him kicked off the Spark, but again, remember, this is the preseason and none of that stuff has really come into light. I don't really see an issue with the Dynasty getting somebody else at flex support. He gives creative a little competition and the incentive to keep on improving. Plus, MCD definitely does offer you a better Zenyatta and Baptiste. If he's not just a bench player, I could see him getting valuable starting time as he could be a strong playmaker, making the support line of Seoul just a little bit more dynamic. And that of course makes the next pick a bit more difficult because the Hangzhou Spark are on the clock and they really needed another flex support. Based on what we've seen, Coldest was not a guy that they wished to field consistently, but sadly they might have no choice this year, at least in round 1, because MCD definitely was the best flex support available, and there's too many high value prospects left over to skip out on to get somebody like Aztec, let's say. So with the 11th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Hangzhou Spark select Shy, DPS, Billy Gaming. At the time, DPS was not the thing the Spark needed the most on paper, given that they still had Godspeed and he was still kind of seen as a reliable starter. But given that Shy was on their academy team, I think the Spark might feel inclined to pick him anyway, just because they always could try and find a different flex support later on. And Shy does give the Spark another touch of explosiveness on their roster that would surely help them out even in a what-if scenario where the team does not exist. Plus, if they don't pick Shy now, they'll likely never get the chance. So better to be safe than sorry. Okay, we're on to pick number 12, which belongs to the Glads. It kind of goes without saying that there is one position in particular that they need to address. With OG gone, they have to go main tank. If there were trades allowed in this simulation, I'm willing to bet that the Glads would make some sort of blockbuster trade to move up just because that is kind of their style, but in this situation, they're stuck with what they've got. But that's okay, because they're looking at a potential steal late into the draft. With the 12th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Los Angeles Gladiators select Chengdu, main tank, Talon Esports. This guy may not have gotten the same preseason hype as your Mags and Muses and Gagas of the world, but him going to the Outlaws IRL shows that teams definitely did have an interest. Given his success, it's pretty easy to see why. Chengdu appears to be a fast learner and an excellent communicator. If you ever saw the camera pan over to the guy during the year, he's almost always talking. He's a true leader who can share the communicating responsibilities, I guess you could say, with Moth and Space. Muse may have a higher ceiling in most people's eyes than Chengdu, but he still low-key might work out well under DPay's system. Speaking of LA teams, the other ones on the clock. Since we're not accounting for finances here, this will be an absolute blessing for a Valiant team who basically dumped away everything and then had to offer minimum contracts IRL. They have the potential to upgrade literally any position they want to, all while not having to worry about any team stealing the rookies they originally signed since nobody would want them anyway most likely. There's so many places the Valiant could go, but one pick made more sense than any of the others to me. With the 13th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Los Angeles Valiant select Nisha, Billy Gaming. Let's call it how it is. The Valiant desperately needed a real main support. No disrespect to Hybe, but obviously he's not really the ideal choice since he had no prior history at the position before this year. Picking up Nisha assures that you're getting somebody with the proper experience and good potential. There definitely were some question marks about him during the preseason, but we quickly found out that there really wasn't much reason to worry. His Mercy and Brigitte truly did stand out, and his Lucio is nothing to scoff at either. He's a decent playmaker and decision maker who truly does have what it takes to climb up the main support leaderboards given enough time. Now, of course, being on the Valiant is going to greatly change his fate, but him coming here still does help the team quite a bit. Up next is the alexyOWL. Now that they've gotten a new roster, they're looking for some new special talent to surround Jonek with. Their guy Flora is off the board sadly, so they still have to look elsewhere to find a carry unfortunately. Even with Flora gone though, DPS still is a position that needs filling out. With the 14th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the New York Excelsior select Guangboon, DPS, Team Cat. He's somebody that the alexyOWL liked a lot during the preseason, and he does fit their needs pretty well. We didn't really see a lot of Guangboon during the regular season this year, but that doesn't mean that he's of no use. Flora simply outplayed him, and there's really no shame in that. I know it may seem weird having him go here, but people are quick to forget that Guangbun was a highly rated prospect coming out of Chinese contenders. He truly did come out of nowhere on a relatively unknown team where he showcased dominant hitscan abilities even against some of the best teams in China. It's hard to say how effective he'd be on like Tracer or Sombra, let's say, but if the situation calls for a sniper or McCree, he's your man. Just remember, he doesn't have to solve every problem by himself. The alexyOWL could easily sign or draft some other DPS players later down the line. Technically speaking, at this point, they'd only have Ivy and Guangbun, so this is only the beginning of that DPS rebuild. The number 15 pick in this draft goes to the Mayhem. The Florida Mayhem wanted to roll with a 7-man roster in 2021, and as it currently stands, they have 0 backups, since technically they don't have checkmate at this time. So basically, it's hard for them to go wrong no matter what position they decide to address. Since most teams these days tend to have at least 3 DPS on their roster at all times, and the Mayhem did have 3 in real life, that's probably where they would go in this draft. With the 15th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Florida Mayhem select Choice Wan, DPS, Element Mystic. Seems like a pretty decent upgrade compared to Checkmate if you ask me. Based on what we've seen with the Charge this year, Choice Wan could be a monster given the right circumstances. A Florida team that better enables him could really help him elevate his game to the next level. The only unfortunate thing is, it's difficult to say how much playtime Choice Wan would get just because Yaki does play a lot of the same stuff and he's arguably better. Surely Kuki could find some sort of use for him, it's just unclear what it would be exactly. But that's kind of how a lot of fans felt Checkmate was going to be, so it's basically the same thing. They need another young and talented DPS to back up their insane DPS line, and Choice Wan is a great fit. Moving onward, the Charge kick off the final 5 picks, and as you can tell, their selection process is not going as intended. Choice Wan is off the boards. Eileen is a great flex option at DPS though, so the smart thing to do is to focus on hit scan, because that's clearly more of a bigger need now that Happy is gone. With the 16th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Guangzhou Charge select Jimmy, DPS, Ultra Prime Academy. Sure, the Charge could settle for K. Lee, but if we're being honest, they might be able to get away with picking him later on. He could definitely still be available in like a theoretical second round. He might even go undrafted, so might as well pick somebody with a bit more value, as seen with how he did on the Chengdu Hunters when they did play him. I'm pretty sure both players were comparable during this time during the preseason, but I would say that more people favored Jimmy, so this seems like an upgrade on paper. As seen by how he played on Chengdu this year, he might be a little raw still, but that's no different than K. Lee. I say that you might as well pick Jimmy now than go for K. Lee or another DPS later on. The Charge aren't exactly in a great position to succeed anyway, so might as well experiment and see what works heading into the future. On to the Paris Eternal. Picking this late really doesn't help you when you're rebuilding from scratch, but the cool thing for them is their highest rated prospects are still right there for the taking. The question is, which one do they take first? I have a few ideas, but first the pick I decided on. With the number 17 pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Paris Eternal select Naga, DPS, Obey Alliance. It's hard to really go wrong with this one, you know? Naga was one of the highest rated European prospects coming into 2021. Despite not playing on British Hurricane, he gained a lot of positive attention on a multitude of heroes. He's a Swiss Army knife who can make meaningful plays in just about any meta you can think of. That's the kind of player that you want to build your team around, especially when you're really just starting from scratch essentially. Don't even think about what he's done on Paris this year either. Just in general, he's a great guy to pick up on a Western team. He can be useful no matter what role you place him in, and he's just a good old-fashioned, reliable damage dealer. However, Paris might find it more in their interest to pick up a support here too, because coming across a reliable backline is usually more difficult than it is with DPS. With that in mind, Khan would also make a ton of sense with this selection because he too has proven himself to be a guy who can live up to the hype. It might be safer to go with him too, then you just address the DPS line later on, since you'll likely come across a couple of guys that you really like at that position since it is so deep. But for me, I think I'm just going to stick with Naga because I really do think it makes sense. And now the Season 3 champs are up next. After losing quite a few valuable assets during the offseason, the Shock would probably want to try and draft a rookie here. It would be beneficial to get some new youth in there. They could choose to add depth pretty much anywhere they wanted to, but if you ask me, I think the most important place that they look to fill out is support, because the loss of Moth is a massive one. It might be in the Shock's best interest to have multiple main support options in order to compensate. I know that a lot of people were hyped about FD joining the team at the time, and there weren't really a lot of concerns, but I think that, again, the Shock probably still should be looking to add some youth anyway for the sake of the future. So with the 18th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the San Francisco Shock select Faith, main support, WGS Phoenix. No disrespect to FD God, he is a phenomenal player, but his style is so vastly different from that of Moth's. It can be a good thing and a bad thing depending on the situation, which can lead to some inconsistency. And if you're looking to pull off a three-peat, top-notch consistency is the only way to make the cut. So that's why Faith would make a lot of sense here. He's a talented individual who proved himself on WGS, and as we've gone on to see with his time on Boston, there's a lot of promise with him. He's young and he needs more time to learn, but Krusty is the type of coach who could greatly help speed up his progression. Something else to like about Faith, though, is the comms. If the Shock wish to, they could run a fully Korean starting lineup with an actual main support rather than having Violet or Twilight on that role. It would make sense for the times where there's characters needed that aren't in FD God's wheelhouse, or just for the sake of playstyle and synergy purposes. It could be a more meaningful move than some people are led on to just because, we saw what struggles the Shock actually went through the last couple of months during the season. So right now this pick might not seem like anything on paper, but in the future it could turn out to be very valuable. Anyway, on to pick number 19. The Fusion fans out there are going to be happy to know they have the opportunity to pick up a promising young player compared to their current, or I guess I should say, previous iteration during the year. This is where the rules may seem a little confusing, so bear with me. With the 19th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Philadelphia Fusion select Gabe Bolsey, off-tank, WGS Phoenix. I get it. The Fusion technically did have 2 off-tanks by week 1. However, you have to keep in mind that Hoppa got picked up mere moments before the start of this year. Once free agency had died down during the offseason, it was the Fusion's intention to roll with Poco, but obviously that didn't really work out in their favor due to visa issues leading to that emergency signing of Hoppa. So you'd have to imagine that the draft would happen quite some time before week 1, so really they could have an additional off-tank on the roster before this even becomes a concern. The Fusion wouldn't even have to sign Hoppa. Now, to be fair, they might sign him anyway just because he did end up having a pretty decent year, definitely a lot better than Season 3, but Gabe Bolsey could be a better upgrade down the road, not just thinking about the present, and I think by Season 5 he could be a real threat if we look towards the future. Supposedly, Philly were already linked to Gabe Bolsey during the offseason from what I can recall, it just didn't go through. I have no clue if the two of them were even close to striking a deal with each other, but if Philly had the chance to scoop him up this late into the draft, I don't think they'd pass up on him. Gabe Bolsey was, without a doubt, one of the highest rated off-tank prospects coming into Season 4. Most would argue that he was top 3 at the very least. He was kind of in the shadow of Punk during the year though, so it may not seem like it to most of you, but it is the truth. Gabe Bolsey was crazy good during the peak of WGS last year. He's well versed and he has incredible potential, which could make him a valuable asset in the future. And lastly, the Shanghai Dragons are on the clock to finish up the round. This team is already set up in such a great way, and there's really not much they can do to get any better. They've got to support rotation and backup DPS during this time, and if they want to not oversaturate any position, then that means that tank would be their best bet. With the 20th pick in the 2021 Overwatch League draft, the Shanghai Dragons select Liege, off-tank, Team CC. While he might be going through some personal struggles here in the present, I don't know if he still is, but that's what I last heard, Liege still was a top prospect at his position. It was him and Gabe Bolsey competing for number 1 essentially. This guy was a menace. Him and Gaga formed arguably the strongest tank line in the entire contender scene. He played a pivotal role in Team CC's streak of dominance in late 2020. His mindset could be vastly better as well under a different system, leading to more positive contributions than you saw in the present. It's true that he's Chinese and he probably isn't the greatest fit on paper for the Dragons, but when Chinese talent is presented to them, they usually at least think about it because they do have Mali after all, do they not? Think about the future too. Void is a top tank in the league, but you never know when he might decide to leave the team. It's becoming less and less unusual to see top players retire mid-season from burnout or lack of passion for the game. We saw it with Striker this year alone, and it's a possibility that you seriously cannot rule out. He very well could leave in free agency for a different team in the future too. Sometimes it's smart to prepare for the worst, even if it's not something we like to think about. Another alternative could be to make him a two-way player for now, just to keep his skills sharp, like with how the Spark did. The possibility of trading him in the future is something to consider too, because if he performs well as a two-way player, let's say, then maybe another Chinese team would gain interest in him, giving the Dragons the chance to make a little bit of money. The point I'm trying to make here is there's a lot of things the Dragons could do with this kind of prospect. He's talented, and his value could easily get higher. That's all I have to say about this pick though, which means that we are at the end of this theoretical simulation. That's how I think a round of drafting could go if it was implemented into the league. Here's a little summary of how the draft went. There's a lot of potential in what could happen obviously since it is a what if. Teams who missed out on certain players choosing to go elsewhere have a chance to snag them with this kind of system, which makes for a potentially more competitive league, or at the very least one that has a different outlook. There's so many guys who could have gotten snubbed arguably in the first round, and again, I think some of you will probably think that way, but that's kind of how drafts go in all sports. There's a lot of you should-haves or you shouldn't haves. Some people find diamonds in the rough, while other people end up greatly reaching on talent when there is somebody a lot better right there for the taking. Just as a reference, here's the list of notable undrafted players who either could be drafted in a theoretical second round or as undrafted free agents if it's one round only. Some of the noteworthy guys who didn't get selected in my opinion are Monk, Sparker, Checkmate, and Khan, among others. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for something like this to exist in the league, but it sure is a lot of fun to think about what it could be like, especially if you are super into traditional sports like myself. On that note, that brings us to the end of our what if. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I did making it. If you did, dropping a like and a sub would be so appreciated. And again, if you're interested in maybe seeing some more draft content in the future, let me know in the comments below. I'm not huge into what ifs, so I likely wouldn't make one that goes beyond the spectrum of a draft, so be sure to keep that in mind if you're making some sort of what if suggestion. And as always, thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.